I'm so excited you're here. I'm just going to dive right into it. For people who don't know, what does an anti-racism coach do? And like, what is your typical day in the life?
Anti-racism consulting in terms of going into people's businesses and really helping them see, like, where can we make this more inclusive? Where can we make this more equitable? And at the same time, sometimes teaching people about some of these societal norms, like patriarchal stuff, white supremacy culture, like, how are we repeating these things in our businesses? And how can we do the exact opposite? And that can sometimes be hard for people, and it can also bring up a lot of stuff for people. So on top of that, what I also do is coach them through that. So I'm also what I call like a leadership coach, because I feel like leadership very much sets the tone for everything else in the business. And when we go into a business, or even when we get like a managerial job, we just want the job. Like, we just want to do the work that we want to do. That does not necessarily mean we know exactly what we need to do in order to be an inclusive leader. So a lot of times that looks like working one-on-one with the CEO. Sometimes that looks like training the team as to how anti-racism fits into the work that they're doing. They may not be able to see that. I think a lot of us don't really see that. And doing a mesh of that so that we're all on the same page, and the work that we're doing is based off of the values of the business.
I think one of the interesting things I found when I was working a corporate job and then now running my own company is that a lot of people get promoted to managerial roles because they're good at their job, not because necessarily they're good managers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I just wish more people realized is you should get promoted, yes, because you are doing good work, right? But if you're moving into a managerial role, your primary focus at that point is not doing, the typical day-to-day work. Your focus is managing other people and becoming, a leader who is hopefully inclusive and all of these things. So what do you find? Do you find a lot of organizations are doing that, kind of promoting people based on their work rather than, how well they can execute as a leader? And then what sort of challenges does that cause, or what sort of challenges do you have to overcome then?
Yeah, I see that with like quote unquote regular corporate like businesses where there's a huge staff. And then also just thinking about like even just myself as a CEO and just a lot of other like entrepreneurs, we kind of do the same thing. We're like, hey, I have this mission that I want to do. Okay, we're going to do that. Damn it, I need to hire people. Okay, well, I need to hire people because I can't do everything. And now we're in this leadership role, and all we wanted to do in the world was the work we wanted to do, but it necessitated hiring people.
And so it's, even as a CEO, right? And that's part of the challenge that I'm finding is like, how do I move less into the, doing the day-to-day work and more doing the high level, either strategy or, making sure that my team have the tools they need to not only perform well and to be well taken care of, but also feel like they're inclusive, like they have, the resources to create content around that. No, that's really interesting.
Right. Yeah. And like, to answer your question about like, what are some of the issues that come from that, is that we just almost like regurgitate whatever it is that we're taught.
Sure.
Right. And so if what we're taught or what we see as like the best way to lead a team or the best way to get people to get motivated about their work is just what we've come up with in our heads or what we've seen other people do, like it just continues the cycle of all these things that we actually don't want to see in the world, but we aren't able to make that connection.
Right? It's like you end up defaulting to what you saw from your parents, for both good and bad. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's the example I was going to use, but I'm like, I don't know if everyone can relate to that.
I feel like my business is a kid in a lot of ways. I'm like, I have 3 million children. How do I take care of all of them? What was your background before you started coaching?
Before I started coaching, I was in the restaurant industry for 7, 8 years. And that was just like my little part-time job so that I could go to school and do what I actually wanted to do. And what I actually was like preparing my life to be was to be a doctor at first. And then after having my daughter and just being realistic about what is that thing? My brain is like, we're turning off today as per usual.
That's me. Okay.
But that thing that doctors do,
Oh, sure.
residency. So residency, I was like, how am I going to be the mom that I want to be and also be like slaving my life away in residency for the amount of time that I was going to
It's
have
a
to be in
massive
residency
commitment.
for?
Massive. Yeah.
It's crazy. It is so wild. And I was just like, you know what? At the time, I was like, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And I was like, let me just step one rung down and I'm just going to be a therapist. And that was my goal. But I was in restaurants for so long. And then I tried to like do some office jobs. And that's when I was like working in Wall Street. And I was like, I hate my everyday life, actually. Like, this is terrible. And then I shifted into coaching because I'm like, that's one rung down from therapy now. That's like baby therapy, and I still get to do the work that I love. So that's like the path that led me here.
Yeah. That's residency. I didn't realize that psychiatrists had to do residency, but I guess that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And residency, typically you don't know where you're going, right? You're assigned, which is a lot of instability, like things you can't control, unpredictability. Yeah.
Right. And the schedules of just like, all right, so now you have to do some overnights. Now you have to do this. Now you have to do that. And I'm like, if I, at the time, I'm going to have like a 4-year-old, I want to be there as much as I possibly can. Those specific years don't come back. Right. So I'm just like, I'm not going to spend it in residency and then being too tired when I come back home. It's that whole industry is just kind of wild, the way that we're expected to
right.
To
well, and
perform.
it also sounds like it's built for one person, which is probably a straight white man, but specifically a single person, right? Somebody who doesn't have a lot of commitments,
exactly.
who doesn't have to raise another person, right? Who doesn't have many responsibilities outside of get your degree, do your work. Yeah, that's super tricky.
Yeah.
You identify as Cuban. I want to clarify off, and we'll cut this. Do you identify as Black or African American?
That's a beautiful.
We can also keep it. Do you identify as Black, African American? Because on our notes it's African American, but I have heard a lot of pushback against that because not all Black people, of course, are African American.
Yes. So, being a child of the 90s, I feel like the way that I had always introduced myself growing up was I'm Black and Cuban, right? And to me, Black meant African American. Okay. And it wasn't until I got to adulthood that I realized Black is not just African American. Right. Black is all of these other different things. And I used to get so frustrated when I was younger where I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm Black and Cuban. They're like, oh, that's the same thing. And I'm like, it's not the same thing. What are you talking about? It's two different languages. What do you mean?
Very different.
So, and it's because my definition of Black was African American. So now I'm like, all right, well, people can see that I'm Black, but I need them to know these two cultures that I hold very dear to me. So now I've had to like train myself to say African American and Cuban. But for someone who is just one thing, it really makes sense to just say Black compared to, for me, I'm like, I need you to know specifically exactly where I'm from.
So for you, it's African American and Cuban, not Black and Cuban.
I mean, kind of the same, quote unquote, but the way that I would introduce myself for clarity purposes, I would say African American.
Because it's more specific. Is that the idea? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the reason why that comes up a lot for me is because I don't even know if I'd call myself like multiracial, but like multicultural. I've always had questions of just like, oh, which one do you feel like more though? You have to
Oh,
choose.
yeah.
You like, and I'm like, I'm
Right.
both. Like
I can be
both. There's no
multidimensional. Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
it's like it's not like do you like apples more
Right.
than oranges?
Right.
Both. It's
Right.
both. So I think that's why I particularly am like so
How do you
specific.
feel like both of those identities inform your work?
I feel like it has truly allowed me to see the world in just a multitude of ways. Um, just being Cuban and even more so being the child of an immigrant, um, understanding how they had to
Yeah.
exist and not even just like, oh, the sacrifices that they've made, but literally the privileges that they did not have as a result of having to leave a country that they never really
Yeah.
cared to leave, right? And really also seeing what racism and prejudice looks like from the Latina point of view, right?